Cleopatra canceled? Why? The conspiracy, representation, and more. Next up on Just the Talk. So let's get into the talk. And welcome to the Flicks, Picks, and the Nitpicks. And I am your host, Nove718. And I want to talk about the controversial film coming from Paramount, or that was to come from Paramount, Cleopatra. Now, to be honest, initially, the question is was it canceled? Now, I figured it was I thought it was canceled. So just before we started the show, I figured let me just go look back so I make sure I know what I'm talking about. But now I realize a little bit of where I believed it to have been canceled. It wasn't that it was canceled. Not Gal Gadot, and also with the Gal Gadot controversy around it, which we'll get into in a little bit later. Patty Jenkins is no longer directing it. That's what it is. It wasn't that it got canceled. It was one of the films that Patty Jenkins no longer will be directing. She will be producing it, which kind of begs the question, you know. And just before I get into it, I want to read just a tad off of this article from as early as January, which made me look it up because I was like, is it canceled? And I couldn't find anything looking it up. So I kind of wanted to just jump right into this article, which will probably elaborate more on the channel, but on MovieWeb. And its headline, Gal Gadot says her Cleopatra movie will celebrate the Egyptian ruler's story. And this is by Jeremy Dick, published on January 4th, 2022. So let's get into it real quick. Gal Gadot says Cleopatra movie she's working on with Carrie Shagland, which is the new director. The story the world needs to hear now. Okay. She obviously can't get too specific, but Gal Gadot is shedding some new light on her up-and-coming Cleopatra movie. Originally, Gadot was set to reunite with Wonder Woman Helmer Patty Jenkins, who'd be serving as director of this project as well. It was recently announced that Jenkins will now be producing the film, and Carrie Skoglund, The Falcon and the Winter Soldier. Oh, I did hear about this. She's the director of that. Alright, that would be interesting. Had come on board to direct the feature. The story of Cleopatra is one that's been told time and time again over the years, from books to movies and everything in between. This poses as a challenge when creating a new film, as Gadot and Skoglund will be tasked with bringing something unique to the table for this new Cleopatra to stand on its own. Speaking about the movie with Inverse, Gadot teased that the story will delve into how cunning Cleopatra was, along with the former ruler's everlasting legacy. I can't reveal a lot, but I can tell you we're going to celebrate the Cleopatra story. Gadot says, we're going to show not just how sexy and appealing she was, but how strategic and smart, and how much impact she had and still has on the world we're living today. I've watched all the Cleopatra movies throughout history, but I feel like we're telling the story the world needs to hear now. One of the most famous adaptations of the Queen Egypt's life story is the 1963 film Cleopatra by director Joseph L. Mankiewicz, starring Elizabeth Taylor in the titular role. The movie has starred Richard Burton, Rex Harrison, Roddy McDowell, and Martin Landau. At the time, Taylor set a new record with her $1 million paycheck for doing the movie with Cleopatra, also setting the then record as the most expensive movie ever made at $31 million, keeping in mind this is 1963 money. The project even bankrupted the studio. Cleopatra was the highest grossing film of 1963, with critics largely responding positively to the film. It was also up for a slew of Oscars at the Academy Awards, which includes a nomination for the Best Picture and wins for Best Art Direction, Best Cinematography. Alright, we'll get into that. Basically, in a nutshell, though, the point being is, coming off of Movie Web, which I won't read the whole article, it is going to really still be done, but it's just that they switched chairs on the director, which we've already expressed why. We're reading though Patty Jenkins coming off at Wonder Woman 84 was a very bad look because she was over promoted, over praised. Not saying overpraised because the first movie was good, but in terms of her as a director, because outside of what she's done, I believe on TV, when it came to films, it was a 10-year gap between her first, which might have been her first film, but the last film that she was praised upon because she directed the actress into getting an Oscar, but she didn't get an Oscar herself. So that was her claim to fame. But with a 10-year gap and, doing stuff on the smaller screen, her next resurgence to the large screen was Wonder Woman. So it just seemed very big. But then now her next effort was such a failure in comparison. It just looked like, we overly invested in her. Maybe we need to fall back. She's still a name. She could get a producer credit if she does Wonder Woman 3 and it is a directorial darling like the first one was, then maybe she'll be set to direct other films. That being said, now, why did she get removed? That's the reason why. Was it canceled? Not at all. So there, we're going to talk a little bit more. Do I believe it will be canceled? It remains to be seen. I don't think anyone's interested in it due to the controversy surrounding the casting of Gal Gadot. So it's very possible, moving Patty Jenkins off with the taint of her name from her previous film may well help this movie get off the ground, because Patty and Gal as a duo looked so good on paper jumping off that. That's why they were so quick to greenlight it. If I'm not mistaken, it was Patty Jenkins' idea. Actually, no, might not have been. She might have been selected by the studio. I forgot, because Cleopatra was supposed to have been done by Angelina Jolie. And at that time, I think there was talks about is she properly cast, but it wasn't a big issue. Now, post that time into now, when Gal Gadot picks up the role in this day and age, due to what's going on in the world, it was going to happen. Now, I don't want to get too lost in the source of the historical aspects, because we could be here all day. But the timing of it, with everything, with representation, etc., and we got to be real. The original Cleopatra film with Elizabeth Taylor sparked a lot of controversy, not just for the casting of her, but just the representation of Egypt. You'd almost think they would, if you looked at the film, you would almost thought it was a white country, as its depiction I won't say basically whitewashed Egypt into looking like it was a white Roman extraction. And so Rome did conquer Egypt, and it is fair to say that there would have been Roman imports in there and some sort of level of miscegenation going on. At its apex, the blackness of ancient Kemet should have been very well represented, if you want to be historically accurate, because the miscegenation, that was the beginning of its miscegenation at that time to the what we see, the lighting up of Egypt. But with that being said, now we can ask ourselves a lot of questions about the history of Egypt and it's not being properly visualized on the large screen ever, because it's always been looked at as a Roman arm. It's been dipped through a Roman Caucasian lens, and it is what it is. I mean, and to be fair, is it a surprise when you're controlling Hollywood that if you want to bring the depiction of what it looks like, that you would see it through your lens? I'll leave it there. But then we have to also keep in mind and not be delusional that we have a historically been whitewashed out of history. And it's never been addressed. It never been dealt with. They got something called Egyptology over there, where it seems like mostly white people control whatever's going on in terms of the interpretation of ancient architecture and ancient artifacts, and it seems to be mostly white control that's supposed to control by the people that are of the land, which historically has proven not to be accurate in terms of representation of the historical facts when presenting black people in a prestigious light. I mean, this is just the history. We can't shun it. We got to acknowledge it, because now in the world, on this channel, I would prefer to take a lot of politics out of movie talk, but unfortunately this is the hotbed that we're living in right now, that culturally now makes people, dissuaded people from even being interested in it. Now, to be fair, I don't think a lot of the people that has made the most critical responses are even well abreast about the history of Egypt. And I'm talking ancient Egypt, not as it pertains to what has been romanticized visually in pop culture. So it wasn't a shock that there would be a lot of uproar and upheaval about representation in these films. We've seen this with a transsexual character that was supposed to be brought to life by Scarlett Johansson, and she fell back. Now that story won't be told. There was a Cleopatra that was done for the TV series that was actually done by a Brazilian young lady. She's a little bit more mixed. She actually played in Blade 2, actually, the one where Guillermo del Toro directed, and she was like the vampire princess. She was a lot more tan then, but she's actually Brazilian, and she played Cleopatra in the TV series, which was actually an excellent film, if you ask me. And to see them rise the story to the screen would be excellent, but then how do we tell this historically? Now this is where we have to blame Hollywood for taking way too many liberties with visual depictions, actual storytelling, just to dramatize the film for the sake of dramatization, to make it exciting, and it'll force people to start to assume that if this is based on a true story, this is accurate to what happened in reality, and it starts to skew real history that has been written over and over again a lot closer to the source time, as opposed to a film that's been written now, mined from stuff from before that has been visually depicted, and they've taken personal edifications just to romanticize the story, as opposed to making at least better hypothesis to bridge the gap between fact and what we could not know to get to the next point, to somehow use a lot more investigative information from the historical accounts and things that happened around that time for us to fill into those gaps, to tell the story the way we can, as best we can, to get the end result that was actually factual. It's not like that no more. They're just we got this point, we have to get to this point, and we will over dramatize and romanticize to get from one point to another for the sake of telling a interesting and well developed story. And by way of that, we can make people look more like a character for the story as opposed to who they were as characters in the real life story. And that could ruin a lot of things. And once we start taking way too much liberties on true accounts, we start to get into the visualization will get perverted, the story will get perverted, how things happen and reasoning why gets perverted, though the key points of what had happened may still be left intact, but the reasons on why and how and the relationships in between has been romanticized and dramatized for entertainment purposes, and the lasting effect of which will leave people to speak not from a space of what was read from direct dry historical accounts, but what they've seen via visual interpretations of, and accepting it as fact because it's been told and sold as a biopic. And then we get all these distortions of truths in historical accounts. And people start to believe that, that can't look like an Egyptian when the real Egyptian is black. A true Egyptian is black. A true Egyptian of ancient Kemet is black. So it's not a surprise when we have all these things going down that we're at this point. And now, to get further into it, people don't realize that Cleopatra, though it's hard to say that she was white, untainted blood, because her line was put as their royal pharaohs after being conquered by Rome. And she's from a Caucasian bloodline, a Eurocentric bloodline. That's where her royalty derives from. And she was installed as their figurehead. Now, over time, the browning of that bloodline, but no one could really significantly track it. Because, let's be for real, there were relationships happening all across the time. That's always happened. They tried to inbreed, but that did not work. So the reality is she fully white? No, but was she an ancient black person? That cannot exactly be true. She might have been inbred biracial by way of just living there and being there over courses and courses of time. It's possible. It's very possible that she has a true black father, and it would have probably, or grandfather or great grandfather, and it would be smart to marry the ancient bloodline of the people of the land, and your ancient bloodline, marry it, control it, so that it forces the people that are blood tied to the soil to feel like you are our true leader, because our royal bloodline has been tied to theirs, even though it's all controlled by their side. They would have claim to the land. Things like that has been done before. Has it been done historically? That I'm not sure of. That will require a lot more studying. Something that no one's going to do. I will not lie, I'm not invested in doing for the services of this because it's not needed, this episode, but it's worth talking about so we can at least have the audience, all of us start really thinking in a better way when we approach why this film may never ever see the light of day. Because it's been, the films of before have been so whitewashed before that even if we to tell the true story of it by showing at least a biracial variation of Cleopatra, anybody that watches it will feel like it's not true, it's whitewashed, because you've done it so much that you can't even now say that we're going to do a real variation. You'd have to go out of your way to do it. We've been visualizations of us in the Bible. You don't even see black people in these biblical stories, and people wonder why they don't like visualizations of Muhammad, and they have issues with people of the Eurocentric background making visualizations of it. Because once you make visualizations of it, the people will start to think that that's how they really look like. And social programming, it just is what it is. People were very well aware of this from prior. This is why they did it. We might have lost the reasons why we've done things, but this is part of the reason why people did things, and this is why certain religions really frown on visualizations of things that go outside our quote unquote firmament, if you will, go outside of our like metaphysics and stuff, like religion. If you want to draw gods and depictions and things of that nature, this is why certain people frowned upon those visualizations of leaders, because it can be utilized as a weaponized against them. That being said, now representation, because this is what I want to get into, because it's being talked about so much in the film, and I wanted to be very careful when I presented this episode, that I really wanted you to understand where I'm coming from by accepting all the other things that came before, so that when we get here to the question, it's easily understood why this film may never see the light of day. Now, some people might say, hey, it's just a movie, and to be fair, look at how people treat fictional characters. They're starting to try to call it our folklore, just so they can have a reason to feel so offended by anything that happens by whitewashing fictional characters, to give themselves some sort of moral high ground for feeling morally offended over Superman, Batman depictions, whatever. But when we go into biblical stories, which actually are tied to archaeological effects, then you'd understand. If you feel that way about that, imagine what people were dealing with before your time of feeling offended by a fucking Marvel movie. Imagine what it was to see these type of depictions of films back then, knowing that that's not even how it's supposed to look, being completely written out of the story. And that's what we're talking about. So now that when you present this film, even though technically speaking, Cleopatra is more likely to have looked more like Gal Gadot than than Iman, the black supermodel, legendary supermodel, was in Remember the Time, looked like Queen Nefertiti, like for real. The woman that really should have played Storm. She is Storm incarnate. Her. Less like her and more like Gal Gadot. Now, if you want to be accurate, if you look at the coin visualization of her, the reality is she might not have been visually appealing at all. That might have been an actual legend, a talk of her, but she did not look like that. Me personally, I'd be more interested in if we would have found a regular woman to play her, unconventionally attractive, and we talk of how she looks like, make her so that when she puts the garb on, she looks over the top gorgeous. But when you take all of that off, the makeup, she looks regular. I would have loved to have seen a film like that, where her beauty was more seductress. That was her practice. To understand how to move in a room and walk. To arouse people via what people have said around them. That would have been a beautifully constructed film, because it would have took some sort of ingenuity and real understanding of the camera and the lens, and how to take a regular person and film them into something much bigger than actually what they are. But if you was to see them in person, you'd be like, that's them. These larger than life stories, and this is what she really looked like. That would have been an interesting story. Because I remember finding a documentary talking about her, and they said, to be honest, she might not have been as exquisitely beautiful as people have overly pushed it. That might have been a story she might have developed over time, or she might have strategically put out there. Because they show a picture of her on a coin. And if it wasn't her, it might have been her sister that she had an issue with. And that would have been interesting. To get an age appropriate person for Cleopatra at that time, and see if we could really present that to the screen. That means that you couldn't have gotten a Gal Gadot. You would have had to get a regular woman that could look just as regular as if we would have put her in the traditional garb and what they did. Her beauty can be lifted to a point of godhood. Then you need an actress that carries that air of elegance, grace, and sex appeal all in one, that she can morph her physical appearance into something that is beyond even what Gal Gadot, Iman, any visually beautiful woman can do. But she can bring that by aura, by glance, by sass, by presentation. That film would have been more interesting, and in that you could have shown who she really looked like all the way through and through, and people would have bought into it. It wouldn't have been this over romanticized. Nah, we dug into it. We're going into, I think it's the Ptolemy bloodline that she come from. But it's a Greco-Roman bloodline, and we could have went there with it. But because films are no longer interested in showing the reality, that even in a time where representation should be spoken about, it's been perverted to the point where now it's just a tit for tat type of thing. You did this to us, so we're going to do this to you, and it loses its sincerity. We need to go to the sources and lift from the sources in all respect. So when they come to you with the Cleopatra for the uninitiated, you let them talk. So I understand how you feel with this history of it. This is why we wasn't really sure if we wanted to approach it. But in order to tell Cleopatra's story, you'd have to know that she wasn't exactly a black African. Her bloodline was imported here. Yes, it might have been tied with others, but they tried their best to preserve it. That it's more likely that she was just a biracial with a tan. But that being said now, because again, it could be a visually appealing film just in terms of archaeology, architecture, visual representation, in terms of just the environment. But can we show this film, even though, let's say, with Gal Gadot, can we show this film without having to deal with the backlash? Because I'll be honest with you, black people are not going to be interested in seeing this film. They're just tired of seeing these type of stories. Every time you go to Africa, it's always some white person being at the helm of it. And to be fair, a lot of black people are just over it. They're not interested in, it's the marketplace. We're talking business. We're not talking about is it right or wrong. We're just talking business. A lot of black people are not that interested in seeing these type of stories in Africa no more. Even if you're trying to tell a true one, that it happened like that. The story actually, the white guy was in Africa. You've done this so much. You rebuffed it. This has also been done with historical characters. So this is to start with movies. This is old, and the anti-angst against that notion has now started to take on a lot of the personality traits of those that were doing it from the beginning. And a lot of people that are crying about, oh, my movie, my superhero movie, you didn't give a damn that a lot of these historical characters were rebuffed with people that look like you. So how can you get mad if someone looking more like me says, hey, you know what, I don't care if they change some of these characters up. You know what I'm saying? Because there hasn't been an acknowledgement both ways. This is where the conflict will happen. I mean, that's what I've always been. I always tell people, for me, it's just, I'd rather these characters look like the source material, as close to the source of the creation as possible. Because if you're going to do something else, then just do something else and call it something else. Now, artistically, there may be reasons why you want to put twists and spins on certain characters. But then when we go outside of the realm of it being for creative purposes, it starts becoming more about just entertainment and a hustle, to the point then we lose any need for being accurate, being true to the story and true to why we're telling it. So the point being is when we ask the question, about what could happen and all the rest of it in this film, in Cleopatra, the representation is going to be a factor if they're going to still move forward with this. You better show a real black Egypt. You better show a lot of the iconography in the back, black people. But no one's going to want to do that care to detailing. They see a beautiful Gal Gadot as Cleopatra because we've over-romanticized, over-beautified what Cleopatra visually, physically was historically. That the fact that when you say Gal Gadot, because she's from Israel, even though she's not an ancient Israeli, that's not how they looked. It couldn't be. She could never have been that pale back then in ancient times. That now that when we think of Israel, we think that's how ancient Israel looked, and we just go on with that, and it plays it out in its mind as if it makes sense. It's accurate when it couldn't be further from the truth. And if you dig deeper, you realize she doesn't look like Cleopatra even aesthetically. That being said, let me know what you guys think about it, and do you feel that representation matters in Cleopatra? How do you feel about it? Did you really believe that Cleopatra needed to be played by a black woman? Do you believe that they can't tell the story unless she is black, whether you agree with it or not? I'm just talking business wise. What do you really feel down in the comments below about this, and what do you feel about representation, if it's important or not? Because to me, representation is important to an extent, but I think at some point we got to pour into the individual so much that if the visualization isn't what it should be, that it takes nothing away from your understanding of what it really is. And because once you're moving like that, the next generation will take a page out of that, to the point where there's no way that anyone will want to even be interested in making a depiction of anything historical. If we can't see the historical people, we can't see historical visualization, we're not pushing for its authenticity visually. Even if I have to get people that's not from obviously that region, but people elsewhere that carry the ancient phenotypes as best as we can. But let me know how you guys feel about representation in films, because you think it's as important as we're making it out to be in this day and age. I personally think it had a better relevance prior times, and these times it's been overly said and overly used to the point with that I don't know if people are even any longer attached to the argument anymore physically. We're just saying it just to win an argument and move on, because when we have a lot of films with the representation you're looking for, if we judge it by first week sales, it seems like we don't see the motivation at the box office. Again, event films are winning, and people would like to latch on what's winning and then try to force feed all these other ingredients that usually doesn't work as topic points for the fandom unless you isolate it the proper kind of way. And that's what I'm trying to do personally with me. Keep isolation in place lists, and keep cover certain levels of the topic so I don't bleed into too many things, because I'm not big on politics on this channel. But unfortunately, because politics is a big part of what's going on in the world today, and it is affecting some of how we accept our films, we'd have to address the politics and deal with the politics before we can even get to addressing the real crust of it, which we have already. So without further ado, again, man, as I've been signing off for the past few minutes, I'm off now. So leave it in the comments below, as always, how you felt about everything we talked about, from representation to how you felt about my perspectives on Wonder Woman 84 and how it affected Cleopatra, even just as it pertains to Patty Jenkins. And let me know if you like the new person tapped on the shoulder to be the director, man. Leave it all in the comments below. Like, share, subscribe. See you next time, and as always, till I have a better outro. Chill.